When you're satisfied with the changes that you've made to your files in Camera Raw, and you decide that you don't have any further editing in Photoshop, then there's two things that you need to do. You need to check your workflow settings, and then you need to save your images. So let's take a look at the workflow settings, and we'll run through two scenarios. The first scenario is we're going to prepare this image either for the web or to email to someone. So that tells me that the color space should probably be dropped down to sRGB. And I'm probably going to save this as a JPEG, so we can change this to 8 bits. Although when I choose to save to a JPEG file, the JPEG file doesn't actually support 16-bit, so it would go ahead and limit the bit depth anyway. Then I can choose my file size. In this case, I'll go with the smaller file size here, and I can also resize when I save the file. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. As for resolution, I can go ahead and put in 72 pixels. It really doesn't matter the resolution because the total pixel count is what matters because that's what's going to be viewed on screen. Now, if I want to sharpen it, I'll go ahead and choose for screen, and the amount is standard. Click OK, and then we'll go to the Save Image options. Here I can choose where I want to save my file. I'm going to save it in the same location, although we could save to a new location, in which case we could navigate and select our destination folder. For now, we'll just save it in the same location. I could rename this, but because I'm going to save it as a different file format, as a .jpg for JPEG, I'm not going to rename it because I like the names to stay consistent so that if somebody asks me about a certain file that they saw on the web, I could then look at my high-resolution file that would have the same name. Now, for format, let's change this down to JPEG, and we can choose what metadata we want to output. In this case, we might only want to output our copyright information and our contact information, and then we can set our quality. Now, quality and file size are always going to be a trade-off here. If I decide to set the maximum quality to 12, I can do that no problem, and the image will look great, but the image will also be larger. If I know, for example, that the person that's going to be viewing this is on a slower machine and it will take longer to download, then I might want to compress it a little bit more, maybe choosing just high as opposed to maximum. And I've just realized that you cannot actually resize your image here in the Save options. So in a later tutorial, when I talk about cropping, I'm going to show you exactly how to use the crop tool in Camera Raw to set up a specific size in pixels that you can then crop your image. That way, when you come into the Save options, you'll get the exact pixel count that you want. For now, let's go ahead and just save this into the same location, and then we'll take a look at the second scenario. So the second scenario, we need to go back into our workflow options. Let's say that I want to save this off as a really high quality file. So I'm not going to save it as a JPEG. Instead, I'm going to save it as a PSD or a TIFF file. I'll change the space here to Adobe RGB. Of course, if you wanted to use a larger color space, you could use ProPhoto, but for now I'll use Adobe RGB. I'm going to increase the bit depth to 16-bit. There's going to be more information in the file, but it will be larger, and that's okay. And I'll increase my file size because maybe I need this to be a larger file. This would be the place to sample it up. And because this is more than likely going to go to print, I'll go ahead and increase this to 300 pixels per inch. But again, I'm not increasing the file size here. My total pixel count stays the same. I'm just telling it how close together I want those pixels to be. And if I were going to take this into, say, Photoshop to do more editing on it, then I would click None here for sharpening. But because this image is finished, I'll go ahead and select sharpening for either glossy or matte paper, depending on what it is I'm going to print to. And then I can choose my amount, click OK. And this time when I choose Save Image, instead of saving as a JPEG, I'll switch this over to either TIFF or Photoshop, choose how much metadata I want to retain in the image, and I'll save it in the same location with the same name and click Save. Now I can click Done to get out of the Camera Raw dialog box, and you can see when we return back to Bridge, I have my JPEG file that I've saved out, my PSD file that I've saved out, and I still have my original DNG file. As you can see, that's an excellent way to quickly process and save your image directly from Camera Raw when no additional edits are needed in Photoshop.